I think that the stream is really actually beginning now. We're looking at OBS. I only have one monitor right now, so um, I'm kind of dealing with, reduced screen space, and also I can't like put my OBS and nonsense on the other screen where it's out of view. Um, why 768? Because my screen is smaller. In fact, I've got a chat on a second computer here. I'll get back my full set of monitors eventually, but I'm stuck like this for now. Alright. Yeah, that's not good. Let me go to forehead. I actually haven't even bothered to do like making sure that my Git is everything ready to go. So this is the 4.1x branch. We're not looking at that today. Switching over to the master branch. Let's push. Oh shit, I don't know if that'll... Alright, so it looks like the Git set up. I have a question here. Yeah, I probably should have typed garbage to check rather than doing what I did, but hey, we got past it. I'm pretty sure it doesn't show, but the other thing I didn't want it to show was like the URL, the direct URL to it, because that's the other thing. If they know, if a person who wanted to gain access to the repository knew the URL, then they could figure out, they could target it and figure out the password. So Valbus, I have a question, and then I have a question from Doubter. I'm going to take both of these real quick, and then unless there's any other good questions, I'll get to the actual stream. Valbus asks, he's currently on version 4.021 and is wondering if there's any good reason to upgrade or wait, and are there big features coming? There's a few things from 21 up to 25, which is the most recent version, that it won't matter a whole lot if you don't upgrade right now. 4.025 is probably a little less stable than 4.021. So in 4coder November, I released a bunch of versions where I got in a couple of stabilizations and new features, but the new features kind of added more destabilizations, and so it's not particularly better in stability, which is why I want to visit this engine a few more times to make a super stable version that if everyone is stuck for 6 months on something that I'm not going to be touching anymore, I want it to be pretty good, pretty solid. Plus, figuring out how to make the first engine solid will mean that I can develop most of the new engine. Like, some of it's already developed, but I can do a large portion of its life cycle with the system in place for, testing and stuff like that. But to answer your question without going on too far, there's not any big new features in the current engine that I have planned. I'm not planning to do anything big. There might be small things that I add to the custom layer, but I'm going to try to keep it very simple so as not to add more new failure points anymore on the old engine. So I'm really just trying to fix all the critical bugs that people have from now on. And as far as should you upgrade now, I would say wait until you have like 4.026 or 4.027-ish. Those will start. I'm going to start trying to stabilize it. So going from 4.021 to 4.025, the only advantages would be like fonts are better. There's some new built-in features for sure, but the quality isn't that much better, really. Doubter asks, will the new engine support multiple windows for buffers and Pi? Ah, you mean Pi as in the Raspberry Pi, right? Um, the new engine isn't really about support for the Raspberry Pi. That's a platform porting issue. And I think the answer is no. I won't focus on that yet. I have this like here, so at any point when I'm ready to do it, I'll do it. But it's not quite time yet. Um, but I am not. I haven't ditched that plan. It's just yeah. It's not the thing with a lot of win on it right now. It's kind of a small thing that will just complicate the building and packaging, and I don't know. It's not like shipping the Mac version, which increased the uh, ability to use it a lot. Uh, as far as support for multiple windows, that's also a platform issue. The new engine is not really directly responsible for dealing with that either, but that is definitely on the to-do list for something that I'll work into the engine. The first when I first released 4.1.0, the main thing that'll be changed is the API and the sort of the customization API and the central system that does like buffer layout stuff and editing and things. And after that, I might go back to doing things like that, but I consider that somewhat orthogonal to the big change happening when I when I introduce the new engine. Alright, Badfly Dog says the rad question. I don't know if you wrote me a rad question or if you just want me to answer your rad question from earlier, but I can do that, no problem. Let's see. How should I tell the story? I mean, it's not a particularly interesting story, so I don't know how much it's worth going into. In 2017, I did a lot of contracting work for Molly Rocket, and I started talking with Casey about moving out to Seattle area to do more work there. And as I talked to him about it, I started talking about the move in general. And one thing led to another, and Casey connected me with Rad that I talked to them and decided I would do that instead, just because, the Molly Rocket team is somewhat focused on like building their game and stuff, and that's not really my wheelhouse. I like slightly more tools-oriented stuff, which, Rad has the bandwidth to onboard someone that can do stuff like that. So I decided to go with them instead. That's kind of all there is to it. And so yeah. Icebearer, I've been running into a copy and paste bug again this week. This time a copy from outside 4coder would only take after copying several times. No idea what could be causing it. I've kind of felt like I noticed that too, and I couldn't tell if I was imagining it or not, but sometimes I feel like I noticed that. I will try to figure that out. Hello all the folks. I haven't been saying hi to people on the stream, but hello to all the folks joining me. Oh, do you think maybe copying from Chrome is busted, not copying to 4coder? That could be. And yes, I see. I mean, it's kind of obvious now that I mentioned I moved, but yeah, this new office. It's not actually an office; it's just a spare room in my new apartment. But yep. Alright, so I'm going to put down the chat for now, and we'll get started on my plan. So, I will try to check the chat occasionally, but, you know, I'm kind of dealing with a slightly reduced setup, so I won't be able to constantly see out of the corner of my eye what's going on. If you care about that sort of thing, I apologize. Alright, so what's my plan? What are we doing exactly? So I sort of mentioned it in the Q&A just now a little bit, but I don't want to add a bunch of features right now to the current line because I want it to be stable, and new features means new failure points. So I'm shutting down, there's like a complete shutdown of new features on this engine. The only thing I will do is possibly add small things to the custom layer or reconfigure things in the custom layer. Even that is bug prone, but I generally find it's easier to fix those bugs just since that code is already open source, or it's like, you know, pay for source. It's non-free open source, so a lot of people, if they have an issue, can just be like, oh, hey, I had an issue, crashed right on this line, and it looks like you can fix it by doing that. And so it makes it easier on me to maintain that, since often bug reports just come with, I also solved the bug when it's in that code. But with that exception of possibly just small feature upgrades, the big point that I want to hit in the next few builds is I have a list of untouched bugs, and I kind of need a plan for how I'm going to go about stabilizing things. So there's a few source of bugs. I'm going to categorize them real quick because some of them I can't deal with on stream just because they're not operating system problems that I don't stream on, like the Mac and the Linux stuff. So we have operating system layer bugs. These I can't really fix using the plan I'm going to discuss either, because these are like the testing framework I want to set up today. Not framework, but like testing system that I'm going to try to build today. It won't sit underneath everything in the operating system layer. Like basically the idea is to drive as much of the behavior of 4coder as possible in an automated way to test how it behaves under certain, you know, inputs and things. And you can't, using a system like that, you can't test a system when you're not feeding data into that system using your contrived, controlled, like data feed. So there are certain bugs that I can only catch because, you know, I've caught them the old-fashioned way. But a lot of bugs, even in the operating system layers, will be caught that with this new system, assuming that I make it work on every operating system. The other problem is, since this is going to sit somewhere near an operating system layer, it will have to be somewhat ported from one operating system to the next, which I can't do on stream either. But if I do choose to do that, that could help with the operating system layer bugs a little bit. The other source of bugs are like core engine problems. There's only a few of these left because the core engine has been kind of stable for a while. It still has problems though. And then like mistakes in the custom layer. And these are super common, but as I said, also very quick to fix. You can even patch them by just sending someone source code that fixes whatever their issue was for a particular build. So it's really quick to fix those, but they're also the most common. And these two I can definitely catch, because these, I've basically split my bugs up into 3 layers that the 4coder architecture is in, right? So the architecture of 4coder is like, we have an operating system layer, we have a core layer, and then we have a custom layer. And this obviously is the same everywhere. This changes according to who the user is, and this changes according to what operating system you're on. And they work together to make it work so that you can have similar behavior on your custom layer, whatever operating system you're on. And so by categorizing the bugs in this way, what I'm hoping I can do is say basically, except for some of the bugs in the operating system layer that will not be caught by this. If I can drive a testing solution that basically simulates the operating system layer receiving input and sends it to these as if real input happened, then I can just run a simulation that I don't know how long it'll take, because it might have to happen in like normal time in order to test things like oh, this happened with this frame and then this happened on the next frame, which is different than getting both of those inputs in the same frame. So exactly how I do that, and if I keep using rendering, because there's also a question of in here there's also like a sub layer in here that's the rendering layer, and this is one of the layers I can't directly test in my current system, but maybe I can find a way to test it. It's a little tough because I'd have to like get output from it and it can inspect it somehow. So that would be more work than just driving the tests with some manufactured input, like simulated input, but it's possible. So basically, what I want to start looking at is on my Windows operating system layer, how centralized is my input system? It might need a little cleanup to make this easier to deal with. And then can I build a sort of a structure that sits in there that allows me to just say, like, run this test script, which is just some input simulation, and basically make sure I am not crashing, and make sure that in some cases I can assert some output happened correctly. There's some other stuff, just like organizational stuff, that I have to deal with to do this, but this is the first, like, thing one, like testing. I want to get a really ruthless test put in place that I can use on this system and in the next version, because the new engine doesn't change the operating system layer. If I build this in the operating system layer, the other advantage is that it will merge very easily with the new engine, and I can keep on testing it ruthlessly like I want to here. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. Before I go on, I want to just double check with the stream that, you know, all the text on the screen has been readable and that I'm not saying anything stupid that has easier solutions or something. I don't think that that would be the case. What's everyone got to say? Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, Abner points out that I'm calling my main 4coder stuff an engine, and that's how you know I'm in the game industry. It's true. It's not super common to call things engines other places. It feels like an engine because I can't exactly put my finger on what constitutes an engine, but I have kind of I feel like a reasoning behind it, which is that a library is like, it has the unique property that has no entry point defined, and it sort of is a thing that lives on its own. It doesn't like interconnect with somewhat unrelated feeling things. So like a library, for instance, often a part of a thing that's tricky with a library is where does the memory come from? How does it allocate it itself? Do you pass in memory? How does it do that? And with an engine, you're basically saying, look, there's a bunch of interconnected parts here, and they all make assumptions about how the other interconnected parts do allocation. They can't really be separated out. So even though even though the implementation of a gap buffer feels like it should be something you could separate out from font rendering, I'm trying to get more performance than I could get if I just wrote a library to do each of them separately and then put them together, because the combinations of these two things have to happen in a way where they know stuff about each other, and so it becomes an engine when you can't split a portion off and say this is the library for this and this is the library for that, because they are too interconnected and coupled to each other. And so it's just like an engine is the kind of code that's too messy to split into libraries. Uh-oh. I have a black screen, huh? Um, Let me see what yeah, so that's a problem. Alright. Alright, so let me take a quick look. If we have a black screen, um, I can just, since I'm using a second computer, I can just pull that up for myself. Huh. Okay, right now I see 4coder in the background. What do I see now? I might just not be able to run 4coder in full screen mode. Yeah, okay, I see it. I see it. I can run it in maximized mode though, sure, surely. Yeah, okay. So, dang. That's just some problem with the fact that I'm using an unusual monitor and the 4coder full screen stuff. That's like, there's a whole class of bugs that I can't possibly test. Yeah, minus S used to fix this, and I took it out where it shouldn't be necessary, and if I was streaming, like, I've streamed with this version of 4coder on my other monitor and it worked. So something about the fact that I'm not using two monitors right now that's screwing it up, or this particular monitor's hardware somehow screws. I don't have any clue why this one is different. But, yeah, that's weird. In fact, I should have known that that would have happened because I also have noticed that the Alt-Tab window doesn't show up when I'm in the setup either. This thing, I don't see it when I'm Alt-Tabbing through with full screen on. So I need to figure out why the 4coder full screen stuff is all messed up. You know what? Juan has the right answer. This monitor is plugged into the different graphics card. Um, yeah. Yeah, this is plugged into the integrated graphics, and the other monitor used to plug into the dedicated graphics. Okay. Okay, so now that we've resolved this and you can see my text and I figured out the graphics card thing, we are back in business. I am going to continue with this thing here. So the first thing I want to do is develop this. The second thing, I won't do this on stream because it involves like going through all my emails and going through forums and stuff. But I want to collate a list of known bugs. I already have a backlog of bugs since the end of 4coder November. Symlinks are still broken on Mac. A crash report here and there. Things like that. So in addition to having a testing framework to try to find those, I want to collate a list of known bugs and work on those. And then the last thing I want to do for polish, this is basically my plan for wrapping up this engine, run tests and fix the bugs that finds, collate a list of known bugs, fix those things. Once I've done lots and lots of bug fixing, the last thing I want to do is, and this is not going to all happen today, by the way, we're going to start testing and see how far we get. But the last thing I want to do is upgrade the how to build and how to customize information on the site and in readmes and stuff, etc. And stuff, etc. That I did that on purpose. I thought that through. So yeah, that's the big three things that need to happen. A testing system that'll help me catch bugs now and into the future, the list of known bugs that I already have, fix all that, and then upgrade the sort of documentation and accompanying materials to help people use the version without, reduce the number of emails hopefully that I get about 4.0.x related problems as much as possible so that I can keep focusing on the new engine after this. So that's the long-term plan, and now we can start working on testing. I guess the right place to start will be to pull up the Windows code. With this small monitor, I'm tempted to go single panel. Yeah, I'm going to do this. Okay. So the platform layer definitely needs to get upgraded anyway, because it's horribly messy and too big, and there's 3 of them that are all too big. It's not entirely my fault because there's so much bullshit, but some of it's my fault. And what we want for now is to figure out how we're going to deal with input. So here I have input events come in, input chunk. What I should do is track down all the occurrences of input chunk. So let's do that. Here's where I define the input chunk. And now I'm just stepping through them. So yeah, that's all part of the same input system. Gathering inputs in the WinProc. Okay, so this handles what? This handles those. So what does that have to do? Why is this also here and doing something differently? Interesting. Modifiers. So that updates modifiers up here. Oh, this is for things like arrow keys and backspace and whatnot. Okay. So the idea is we look this up in the key code lookup table. If that comes back as 0, it means that it was just some alphanumeric character that needs to go through translation. If it's a key like backspace or arrow keys or home or end or insert or whatever like that, then it does get processed right here because it won't come through here correctly, or maybe at all. This is somewhat arbitrary nonsense that just, worked out this way over time. I don't really know. This is weird, of course, because I'm saying if the character is a tab, make it a tab. I guess that's because this is less than 32, and so it needs to be escaped. Why don't I just write this to actually say do nothing? So here I'm just saying, look, if the caps lock is down, then swap it over. That probably doesn't actually work in the general case. It's probably keyboard layouts where that's all fucked up. Needs to be upgraded. Key event data, control keys, control key size. So let's see. So all that's happening here is we grab stuff. Some of it comes from the transient portion of the input chunk, and some of it comes from the persistent chunk portion of the input chunk. The idea of transient versus persistent is that basically every frame the transient portion is cleared to 0, and the persistent part is kept. So its state persists from frame to frame and is mutated, whereas the input chunk is like the transient part is cleared to 0 and rebuilt every frame, because it's like an array of the keys that got pressed this time or something. And yep, that just gets populated in here. Let's keep walking through other places where input chunk happens. So I have a problem right now where it doesn't wrap correctly because I went to one panel and then back to two. So if I jump here, we look at the new x and new y values. If this has actually moved, if it's different, then we store it, and we got a useful event, right? Okay, mouse wheel, left click, left release, right release. And then here, when we lose the focus or set it, we just clear the persistent mouse state to 0, and the modifiers we clear to 0. Alright, so I kind of want to see, because this is obviously specific to Windows, I'm noticing. What does mouse X mouse control keys L control. Okay, so this is for tracking the left and right alt and control separately, and this is the one that actually tells us which modifiers we're treating as pressed and not pressed. And that's important because on Windows, keyboard layouts sometimes rely on the idea that like left control and left alt together don't mean control and alt at all, or stuff like this. I can't quite remember, but it's like L control R alt or something like this. I can't remember. Some weird key combo of specific sides of control and alt means something that the other sides doesn't mean. And it's escaping me right now, but I don't think it's too important to figure it out for my purposes. Again, that's one of those things you can't really, because you can't really test if you're going to simulate input. You can't really test keyboard layouts, right? I don't know how to do that. That's a problem that I still haven't totally solved on Windows, for instance, which is how do you totally correctly handle everything. It's gotten very close, but I know that there's still problems with like the actual bindings getting all messed up, and I have no way that I can even think of to get close to having the best of both worlds, where both worlds are. On the one hand, you want to be able to very easily figure out which the key code that goes to a key when you're writing your custom code, so that if you move to a different operating system it doesn't change, so that if you move to a different keyboard it doesn't, so that nothing can ever change the way your code has to be written to customize the same way, right? You want the same custom code on two different places to work exactly the same way. And at the same time have it so that if I switch from the English keyboard layout to, I don't know, like I think Dutch is one that I get a lot, a Dutch keyboard layout, that the keys still make sense, and that some of them haven't, like, you know, oh, that letter, you know, is not even anywhere on the keyboard, or that symbol, so you can't do that key combo. In the default bindings you'd have to customize it to make it even work. Like, it'd be nice if it could keep the same layout, but I have no idea how to make that happen on any of the operating systems, actually. Except maybe Linux, I don't know. Well, I don't know how to make it happen. I just, on Windows and Mac, I'm pretty sure that I've studied it and don't know how to make it happen, whereas on Linux, I haven't studied it and don't know how to make it happen. That's the difference I'm getting at. So, anyway, let's keep walking through these. Yeah, so whether we're trying to kill comes in on the input chunk, that makes sense. Trying to kill as in trying to close the program. That gets sent in this way because, like, you could click this X here, and so if I've made a change here and then I click the X, I want it to not actually close. let's see. Here's figuring out that left control, right control, alt nonsense. So we have control is pressed if right control is down, or if the left control is down but not the right alt. Right? That's just, it's wacky, but that's what you have to do to make L control, alt control stuff work. Or L control, right alt is what it is, yeah. You can see it has some weird meaning, where I'm specifically testing for right alt and left control and their relationship. Or, yeah, okay. Got it. So it's if both of them together? I really don't know. I really don't know. It might be that I'm one way or another I'm trying to simulate the control and alt modifiers from some odd combination of them to make it behave the way that some keyboard layouts expect, but that it doesn't if you, like, it loses the modifiers or something. I can't exactly remember. So what is this? Right, so this is the loop that gets messages, waits on this one until we get a useful event, and then it does this one so that it doesn't block and gets all the rest of the messages it can get, and then it moves on. And then when it comes back, it will find that it doesn't have useful messages anymore, and it will start blocking again. It's just kind of a way to have a system that works like a game loop, where you gather input and then dispatch, and then gather input and then dispatch, rather than having one input event respond, one input event respond, which is how a lot of applications start off. This starts off more like a game loop and then just adds in a blocking version of the peak message at the start of each frame, basically. Alright, let's keep looking for, yeah, that's what I was looking for. So we also simulate input there. So input is actually spread out all over the place. We've got all the stuff here in the wind proc that gathers input. And then in addition to that, we have here, during the main loop, some stuff that modifies the way input works, because Windows is all wacky and wild. And then we have in here, in the main loop, a thing for testing our relationship with the window, and for updating the mouse position, I guess. So why are we even bothering to collect input on mouse moves if we just update it right here? Anyway, I couldn't possibly tell you why we're doing that. That just seems like silliness. Cruft that built up over time. Here I even have a note that I need to go cross-reference this with something in the Linux code that does it differently, I guess. Here I'm figuring out whether or not the caps lock is pressed. Alright, here I actually do something different, which is I'm now translating from my input chunk, which I took a copy of right there, and I'm initializing the actual input. And the actual input is actually much more centralized, I think, which is good. Because it means that what I could do is just ignore all the stuff I was just looking at, which is too spread out, and look at it at this level. So this is one of those things that's like, when you start thinking about the stages of data transformation explicitly, it becomes super useful. So I have a stage where I have events and nonsense from Windows that I have to organize in some messy way. And then I didn't dump that straight into the input struct, thankfully, because that's something I could have tried to do. But it looks like I decided to add an extra layer of abstraction, and I did it not by like calls or something, but just a data format. So I said, here's the data format that Windows will dump its crap into in whatever messy way I need to. Here's the format that the core engine actually expects me to pass in for the input. And I do a translation phase from this to that. I couldn't tell you why I decided to do that, but it's very fortunate that I do, because now I don't have to worry about that mess when I want to insert this testing system. I can just look at, oh, this spot here where I translate, I'm just going to let this run, ignore it. I'm going to stop translating, I'm going to add in a switch that lets me stop translating real stuff into my input, and instead I'll just synthesize an input a different way and then pass that on, right? So this is the sort of spot where it'll be most efficacious to insert like a switch that I can flip to change where real input is going to the core. Which again, that means everything that happens prior to actually dumping stuff in here isn't tested. The thing that actually talks to the platform and collects input isn't being tested here. If I knew a way to like just simulate input to an application from outside of it, that'd be so much better. But I don't know a way to do that. Because then I could test the code underneath this phase here, right? I could be like, well, I'm simulating this, but it's not happening correctly, so it could even be catching bugs in that collection layer. Now the thing I gotta watch out for is I'm wondering if all of it is actually consolidated to here or not, because it looks like trying to kill maybe isn't. And that I have to check out. Yeah. That's getting initialized there, which is not cool. So the idea of this is I'm setting stuff up in app step result so that it has some default values, so that the core doesn't have to fill those values. If it chooses not to fill them, then nothing will happen, and it'll stay the way it was. But that's actually the wrong way to think about this, because the core is the shared code. If this is the same behavior that all three platforms are going to do, then I am now in three different places doing work so that the core doesn't have to do it, and that's the wrong trade-off. The core should do that extra work. The core should do the extra work because it's one piece of code instead of three pieces of code. So maybe I want to fix this organization problem here, because really the idea that some of my input isn't simulated through that input struct is going to be a little chink in that armor. Well, that's not the right analogy. It's like a small like bypass around that main switch that I was describing. That's what I'm talking about, right? If I have a main switch where I'm going to control where input's coming from, I don't want something bypassing that, which is what this will be doing. Yeah, this is largely irrelevant. When we're simulating input, we won't care about L-control, L-alt, because that is strictly a rule about how Windows does its input gathering, and it doesn't actually affect, once Windows has done the input gathering, that helps it determine what to put into this, but again, we're going to be simulating what happens once, assuming we've already got an input of a particular type. Like once we've got this input data, what happens next? So this we don't care about as much, and this isn't really coming from the input. So yeah, what we're going to do first is try to get off of having these be simulated in the platform layers. App step. Alright, so we see right here we get passed in an app result. Right? Trying to kill. And that's kind of weird. I mean, we're not even bothering to return that directly. We're passing it in as a pointer. I might change this organization, actually, which is kind of, you know, slightly risky thing to do, but I mean I can see all the stuff that is involved right here. Result isn't that complicated to build, so I'm basically talking about trying to kill. Yeah, and you can see I have other to-dos here about, I have this thing called send exit signal that is a different way of setting trying to kill to true, and send exit signal can come from app step. It sets that to true, and then when it comes here it knows to set trying to kill to true, and then send exit signal to false. That's all like an architectural mess. So I want to slowly step off of all of this cruft here first. And I think the right way to do that is to force myself to change. Whoops, no, give me this. It's just force myself to change by changing this function signature a little bit. And instead of returning by a pointer like this, we're going to actually just return it. And that's going to force me to re-examine all the nonsense. Okay. Starting from right here. So, there. Now, the only difference between what I had before and what I have now is that now I just clear it to 0, and I used to have mouse cursor type L control L alt is alt-rater trying to kill all set from outside, and I'm going to try to see if I can just get them all set right here instead. So we know, for instance, the app result mouse cursor type is just the default cursor, and that's like hard-coded. So let me visit the other operating system layers real quick. Here we can see again I'm passing in result as a pointer. We're going to try to get it in the return instead. And yeah, right here I'm setting cursor type directly. Of course, if I found that one of these was doing something different with the default, it would change what I have to do here. But you can see they're all choosing to do this, which means none of them need to do it because the core can just do this instead. Right? Result needs to come in this way. Okay. So, there's our first little baby step. It's still not even correct because we still have compilation errors and data that's not flowing through, but I'm going to take a quick moment to check the chat. This feels like an appropriate time to see if anyone has any comments on what we've done so far. Next equals, how does 4coder do rendering? OpenGL? Yeah. It's using OpenGL 2.1 right now, which is super old. I want to abstract out the renderer in the next engine. One of the things that I'll be doing that's a bit smaller than the other things is making the renderer fully separable so that it can actually render using like OpenGL 4 or 3 if those are available, and then it'll like step down and have a list of renderers to try and initialize. This comment just made me chuckle. Look at this. That shit is fucked. Okay, anyway. Luckily we'll get that fixed today, I think. And with that new rendering scheme that steps down, one of the advantages will be on any operating system or any computer where it can render on something better than 2.1. I'll be able to do stuff that I haven't done yet. Like right now this all has to go through immediate mode the way it's set up, but I'd really like to build a renderer that just like, you know, all of these characters come from, they have the same color, they have the same font atlas, right? Same texture atlas for the font. And so you could easily just make this one draw call for all of these characters. And there's something super nice about doing that. It uh, it makes your problem closer to a data, like, not even, I don't know if that makes things faster or not. People always talk about getting draw calls down anyway, so I assume it does, but I don't know and I don't care unless it makes it slower, because what I like about it is it turns a lot of problems into simplifies problems into more data transforming style problems, because instead of making a thing where you're passing in data and then doing a loop over a bunch of calls or something, you're basically passing in data and passing that data into one call. So you're just, here's a data format we need to output. The abstraction isn't, here's a bunch of calls you need to make in a loop that figures everything out. The abstraction is um, do a data transform and then pass it to a function. Bad Fly Dog asks, what's the current line count? Let's take a peek. Whoops, this is the wrong terminal. Hey, that's not as big as the one on the 41x branch. The 41x branch is like 55,000 lines. It's bloaty. It's bloaty. It's not like, you know, the JAI compiler where I put the right amount of work into keeping it small. Alright, let me chat with Juan about this, because he's smarter than me, and I'd like to know how to do these things well. So make a text / style frame buffer. Okay. Use that to do indirect texture lookups to Atlas. Indirect texture lookups to Atlas. Text style frame buffer. You know, I don't exactly know what you're talking about. Can you give me some kind of introductory material on what exactly you're getting at? I know what a frame buffer is. I'm not entirely sure I understand what you mean by a text / style frame buffer or indirect texture lookups. Like if, sweet. Sprite tile maps on GPU. Let's take a look at this. Maybe I should bump this over to the main screen. I'm going to do that real quick. blog.tojcode.com 2017 7 Sprite tile maps on GPU.html. Not quite right. 2012. Hey, okay. Let's take a quick interlude to see what this is about. Because I'm getting ready to do a lot of font stuff on 4coder too. And so I've been looking for better and better ways to improve the rendering. I had a fun idea yesterday while playing What Else Spelunky, and I decided to give it a go. The result is this demo, which I'm reasonably proud of despite its simplicity. I know it doesn't look all that impressive. After all, the SNES was doing that kind of stuff a long way back, and they didn't need any fancy WebGL to do it. Heck, even a rudimentary HTML canvas renderer can get similar results, so what makes this so special? Well, what if I told you the entire thing was done on the GPU by drawing a full-screen quad? Interest peaked? Right, let me read that more carefully. On the by drawing a full-screen quad. This is a fun little exercise. GPU abuse. Improve useful in the right context. I'm not going to go super in-depth on every line of code, but I did want to explain the basic technique and discuss some avenues for expansion in the future. The core concept is this. Everything is driven by two textures. One is your standard tile-based sprite sheet. So this would be my texture atlas for my font, I assume. and the other is a specially built map of each tile on the screen. I want to zoom in. Okay, so we're just talking about pixels. Okay. Okay. But that's actually the image that's generating the map you see in the demo. The trick is that in the shader, we treat each pixel of that image as a lookup table for the sprite sheet. Sprites are identified by storing the x and y coordinate in the red and green channels respectively. So a red value of 1 and a green value of 2 indicates that the tile at 1, 2 in this case, the first cluster of buried gold, is the tile at that point on the map. Thus, while the map appears to draw in black and white, the black contains subtle variations that indicate different tiles. Okay. Put that basic idea in place, along with some minor math to properly lay out all the pixels and take into account things like view offsets, and you've got an entire map that can be drawn with a single call. Okay, I get the idea. So we're talking about, we have our texture atlas here, and then we have right here just some kind of like a frame buffer that we render to one pixel. Each pixel in the frame buffer gets basically the coordinates of a tile. And then what you have a shader that samples from that texture to get the coordinates that it used to sample from the other texture to render. Interesting. Alright, well that's good to have in my brain. I'll think about that. I will think about that. Alright, so let's keep walking through this. So here at the end, instead of trying to return it this way, I'm just going to return the app result. Okay, so the danger is now it compiles, but I haven't actually finished the work. But I know what else I have to do now. So I want to move the rest of these over there. So I need to set result, or I need to initialize the results L control L alt is alt greater status in a way that comes in from input. So fored.h input, yeah, control L alt. Is that the way I want to do it? I feel like that's the right way to do it. The only thing I don't like about that is it puts it in the input, which I just earlier said doesn't actually worry about this, but I guess that was just wrong. It does worry about this, but it only worries about it it doesn't actually tell the the core. Well, honestly, why is the operating system looking at this at all? Why would the operating system pass this in at all? Shouldn't the core own this data? Shouldn't the core be the one who's in charge of this? It just tells the operating system layer what we're doing, not the other way around. Because it feels like the core should just be saying, hey, I really want you to use this mode, and whatever the operating system layer uses, it uses, but it never communicates back what it's doing. That feels like what should actually be happening. So that raises the question, where does that come from? Where does that come from? So later on, I see that this gets set from models, settings. Get models right there. Let's reorder this a little bit. So let's just say that this always comes from here, and now when does this ever get set? Right, this only gets set from the results. There's really literally no point in passing that in any way. Okay. So that's nice, because now we're getting rid of this idea that the Win32 layer actually owns that concept. Rather, it just stores what the core is forcing it to store, or requesting for it to store at least. And it's doing whatever it wants with that information. If you're not on Windows, it's ignoring it, because it doesn't mean anything if you're not on Windows. Alright, so this should probably come in through the input, this trying to kill thing. I feel like that is actually something I do want to be controlled by that switch between simulated and real input. Right. And for now, we still want to fix this to do here, because that seems wrong, but it gets us a little closer, because we know we have situations in this case where input can happen. Clicking on the exit, the X button on the window, this guy up here, killing it from Task Manager, things like this that should tell 4coder to try to kill itself. And if it doesn't want to because it has files that are unsaved, then it doesn't have to, but we want to be able to tell the core when this is happening, and it's not always possible for the core itself to do so. But sometimes it also comes from within the core, this idea that it needs to kill itself, and that is where this round trip happens, so that it all goes through the same channel. But I feel like it could be simple if we treat it as input and think about it that way instead. So we're going to try to deal with this today too, because hey, we're in the code and it's a known problem. Let's clean that up while we're here. But this is coming in on input now, so that should cause a build problem. Okay. Right? No, because okay, so what did we used to do with trying to kill app result? Ah, so this just checks if app result says it's trying to kill. What happens if result still says it's trying to kill when it comes back? Nothing. So that doesn't actually belong in the app result, actually. The app doesn't need to tell the platform layer when it's trying to kill. It only tells the platform layer when it is actually performing a kill. So this should come from input. Brilliant. Okay. So that's coming from input, and then the result can say if it performed the kill or not through the result, but it doesn't report anything about trying to kill because that's really input and it's really not a result thing. It's so hard to even imagine how I got that so like twisted around itself and stupid. But let's visit the other platform layers real quick. Result, because they won't get that right because they were built on the same system. Frame input. Oh shoot, I just deleted the code that told me how to do this. Okay. So, see, this is one of the things that's a little nasty, is the other operating systems don't actually have that separate data format. They fill the input directly, and then they just copy it and pass it, which means we still have a switch here, because we just say like, oh, don't pass in this input. Let me just pass in a different one, and the translation doesn't actually happen because I guess these aren't as messy as Windows, so the format they're filling doesn't have to be quite as different as the actual input that we end up passing, which is nice, and we don't actually have to change that. That can stay that way. But what it does mean is that we want to watch out for things like, does this input actually contain trying to kill information, or what? Because now we have a thing here that gets set like this that is different than what got copied in from here, and so it's starting to get a little bit of cruft here because of the fact that we're trying to translate this way. Now maybe this can actually get swallowed up into this somehow, or maybe this needs to get expanded out like it is in the Windows one. Because you can also see the other disadvantage to this is I don't have like transient and persistent separated like I do on Windows. On the Windows format, one nice thing I was able to do was, since I was making it separate from the actual input to the core, I went ahead and separated those things that get cleared to 0 from those things that don't into 2 separate structs, and then I can just clear this portion to 0 in one memset. Whereas here I have to manually list out the things that get cleared to 0 on this platform layer and in the Linux platform layer, and when I change these structs I have to go and make sure I'm getting that right, or it introduces a bug. So I feel like actually there would be advantages to switching over to a different format that you fill, but I'm not on these operating systems right now, so I don't want to do a big change like that. I mean big, like a minor change with finickiness while I'm not actually programming on those operating systems. So this is just me trying to patch it to make it close to the right thing, and when I get off stream and I'm on those computers, I will check these more directly. So let's take a look at the Linux one. So you can see even here this is weird because it's different. Where is my input coming from? I'm just passing it in directly on this one. So we have to, again, set it up like this one, where I copy the input. And the exact reason I was doing this frame input thing here, if you're wondering, is because there's this stupid problem where you have to like control the order in which you do things here on Mac because of the event structure. That it seemed like it was causing a bug to not do a thing where I copy the input that I'm going to pass and then clear to 0. Because what I would imagine you would actually normally do is just pass this in directly and then clear to 0 before you start gathering input, but it just has this problem where, because the events I think can come in asynchronously, you can get an event on this structure that is an input that you get after you called the core but before the clear to 0 that you then lose. So this is like to minimize the time between when we take the snapshot of the thing we care about and clear to 0. And really it seems like I actually probably need to introduce a locking mechanism to make it 100% correct, but I haven't done that because, like, come on, Mac, what are you doing to me? And I might be wrong, that might not actually come in asynchronously, but it seems like it does. It seemed like it does back then, at least. Alright. There we go. So now, if we focus on the operating system we're actually using so that we make sure we're not making mistakes. Do we compile correctly? No, I want this one. Alright, I want to see now how this runs. So I'm going to pull up the debugger, and while we're waiting on that, I will do another round of checking out the chat. And I feel like I'm probably losing large chunks of the chat. Alright, let's see. So, yeah, so my initial thought on the tiling thing was that it would be a speed up for sure with monospace fonts. But I'm unclear on if it would work if they weren't all evenly spaced. I mean, There's a few things you'd have to consider. One is the offsets could no longer be integers that you've multiplied by a fixed width, but you could just put in a pixel position still. But the other problem becomes, if you're doing that, how do you get the spacing exactly right? Because the idea is that your frame buffer is smaller than the full screen, so that you have a really small thing that's like, here's the tiles, and then to render this, I have like 20 by 20 texture that I pull out a color, and then that looks it up, and then I put it on the big one. And if those don't have the same width everywhere, then it doesn't seem like it works, at least along the horizontal direction, but you could still actually do the same idea vertically, right? You could basically say, we have a really short, long texture that along each line of this texture is one line of text, and then we do all of the X pixels at full resolution along that thing. And that just gives you a way to look up, at each point, it gives you the XY coordinates directly of where to get like the one side of the texture, and then a standard descent to get the bottom of it, and then you could expand out the tall one. I'm not sure how much that would be worth it, but it would kind of be implementing the same concept in a sense. I don't know enough about the math of why it's a win to do it the other way. Like, obviously it's a similar idea, but did I give up the most important aspect by doing that? I don't know. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I lose portions of the conversation when I leave the chat down for a while, because it shows this little message, welcome to the chat. All I see is discussions of Ultima 6 and the 3 levels of indirection in their tiling system as it relates to the idea that we were talking about with tiles before, I think. And then I see welcome to the chat room, and then maybe there's nothing else in the conversation between these two things, but I see Juan saying you could turn the scatter into a gather by doing a search in the pixel shader. I don't know if that relates to my problem that I was just discussing. You just have to clarify, because I'm, again, not clever enough to understand if that relates to the variable width font problem. Heyo, Captain Craft. While I wait and on the chat to see. Alright. It looks like everything is working. I won't know for sure if you guys can see this while it's in full screen, so let's see if closing still works, or some other things I changed. Yeah, if I switched to an IRC client, I wouldn't have this problem, or if I just had 2 monitors like I'm used to. The other thing I changed was changed how do I kill the app? The cursor stuff. Yep, that works. And Alt L Control. Now I'm not on a keyboard system that lets me do that, but if I remember correctly, that one was like ridiculous how silly it was, because I was passing in a variable that only ever gets set from the result anyway. I'm pretty confident that that one wasn't messed up, so I think we'll move on. Yeah, I know what scatter and gather mean. I don't know how it relates to the variable width font thing. You could turn the scatter into a gather. What's the scatter? The scatter is yeah, I don't even actually know what the scatter is in this case. The closest thing. I see. Oh, see ya, Croifa. Yeah, so you're talking about right, yeah. The I see what you're getting at. The normal way to do this is to scatter points. I see what you're getting at. Because when you the normal way to do this would just be like, here is the triangles that make up the quads that are the glyphs, and you're just sending those points out where they need to go. And the idea of switching to a texture is that instead of doing that, you're kind of pulling the information in the fragment shader stage instead. Yeah, I'm not. I'm very curious about these things because I'm going to experiment with them for a while. Um, so I'm open to wild ideas. For mono, the other question is how much of a win is it? I mean, you have the advantage that you are talking about rendering all of your text in one draw call. So assuming that you have one atlas to pull from and stuff like that, and that it's all the same color, or that you somehow have packed color information into a similar thing. Yeah, I'll switch to dark. Not a problem for me. I feel like every time I stream I get a request to switch back and forth. But maybe it's always me switching to dark and I don't realize it. That everyone wants it in dark. No. Here it is. Yes, you could fix the color problem by encoding another texture that puts a color on each pixel that corresponds to the pixel you use to color the glyph. It's worth thinking about. The advantage is you get the one draw call. The disadvantage is you first have to fill these buffers with the right information anyway. So you still have a part that is similar, but at least that part is much smaller and um, slightly more abstracted in the sense that like the way you set the you're somewhat independent then from I can render that texture in software if I wanted to, uh, without having to actually know the full atlas, just the points. Um, and I guess the widths depending on whether it's monospace or not. Yeah, it's interesting. I will play with that someday. Okay. So, I managed to reorganize this nonsense. Now let's do like something actually useful. There's definitely a bug. Look at this. It's placed my cursor back here, but this is not where I am. I was last down here, so there's some kind of bug about not remembering locations correctly that I want to look at, which is bad news, because that has to do with how scrolling works and how positions work, and fiddling with that is just asking for bugs. But it has a bug anyway, so back to the drawing board on how to make it not have the bug. Alright. So, now what I want to do is I want to add some kind of way to control the mode that lets me say, hey, don't pass in real input, I'm doing this in fake mode, in artificially constructed test mode. Here we go. I'm going to switch back to one panel. So, I'm looking at command line stuff because I think the way I want to be able to do this is to pass it as a command line flag, maybe? Or should it be a build mode? It could be just an if def, or if not defined kind of thing. The advantage to that is if I do it that way, I don't have to pass through the core. I don't have to pass information to the core and get it back before I know I'm in that mode. Now, I don't actually pass any input to this, right? Like, the only input I pass to this, I should say, is the command line argument. I don't pass any of the things that I want to control. On the other hand, I might actually want to, when I'm setting these scripts up, be able to say, run this with these command lines. Which I suppose is the same as saying, run 4coder with these command line flags, and then this other one that says run it in test mode with this script, and then I don't have to build it separately. The advantage to putting it in the flag is then I can ship a version that other people can run tests on, so I can be like, yo, you got a bug, well, can you run this test real quick and see if that reproduced it? Okay, then great. Now I have more information. I feel like that's a win. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say let's do it with a flag. Less build options makes life easier, and so I'll just do it this way. Now this is a platform setting, actually. Alright, so I've set it up to parse that ID at least. That we can ask for a specific test, and I'm just going to make sure that I fully am getting that right. So whoops. Alright. So that's the real way to get the input, or to fill the input struct. This is the fake way, the testing way. Uh-oh. That isn't a pointer on this side. Makes sense. And so now, if I run this, by the way, one second, why is this font so gigantic? Can I fix that real quick? Is that okay? Is that really size 10? Alright, switch to, or 12? It was 12 before, it seemed huge. Maybe 4coder doesn't render font sizes correctly. Not sure. I have to check the DPI stuff, because that would be where the bug would be. Anyway, properties. Alright. We're not doing full screen right now, and we are doing test mode. Alright, so no inputs coming in. I don't get why it isn't a split, though. How did that change? That's a little wild, don't you think? Why would that affect that? Whoops, no, not F1. Oh, stop it. Yeah, that's weird. That's properly weird because the test thing just controls input. The split doesn't happen from input, so it's not a lot of sense to that. As you can see, I am pulling up the chat because whenever something is frustrating or surprising, it's good to just read the text here, let it distract you. Hey Rarif, I'll let you know what we're doing real quick. So I'm setting up a test system so that I can ruthlessly just hammer away at 4coder bugs for a few builds until I'm pretty sure that everything is solid enough that if I never upgrade this engine again, that it'll be okay. You know, good enough at least. And I don't have the chat on a separate monitor right now, so I don't see everything that happens on chat. Just the things that I see when I pull it up. But with that update for you out of the way, and I don't see anything else in chat anymore, I can get back to real work. There's no more excuse. The chat let me down, there's no distractions, I have to do something real. So, let's figure out why this isn't splitting. Let me real quick just check, like, trying to kill, like, literally none of that has anything to do with splitting the window. Panel. What's the name of the function that I'm looking for? Is it open view? Yeah. Okay. Does this still get called? No. Suppose I am not in test mode. Then does it get called? Yes. What's the difference? Oh, I know what the difference is. I know what the difference is. It's actually not that complicated. It's this right here. That's the difference. You know, I don't know why it is so often that the way I solve a problem is that I start the debugger. This isn't always, but it's often enough that it seems like a defect in the way I think about my code is that I'll launch the debugger and that will get me thinking more critically, and then I'll discover what the bug was without actually seeing it in the debugger at all. And you just saw this happen just now. It's like, for some reason I have to launch the debugger to get my brain in debug mode, and then my brain can solve the problem without the debugger a lot of the time. It's stupid. Okay, so that's with input still. Let's put it in test mode. Hey, okay. So yeah, I can now artificially control what the input is each frame. It still sees multiple frames. I can do things like this, etc. Now, the other thing I'm going to want to do is, suppose I'm sitting here doing nothing, but I want this sort of the input system, the simulated input, to be doing stuff. I don't want 4coder to do that get message thing that blocks and not actually keep going. So the thing I have to change is I don't want to block if I'm in input test mode. I actually don't want to block at the beginning of each frame. I just want to keep running like normal, I think. The other thing I could do is if I'm in input test mode, like ping the messages with a timer. The only advantage to that is that it would let me, if I wanted to have a test where I waited for a second and then did the next input, I could put have it sleep for the second while it's not doing anything. I don't know. That's a lot of work for that level of advantage. I feel like it'd be more complicated than just ifing out the blocks on every operating system, because they're all going to have very different ways of pinging the queue. It's not really worth it. So we're going to go and just take out the blocks entirely when we're in this mode. Whoops, that's not right. If we are not using test input test. Okay, that should really be called use test input. What was my, I never do a good job of thinking about why a name should be the way it is until I've read it a couple times. There we go. Alright, now what we want to do is I want to be able to basically now we're going to have to do this in a couple of stages. So the first stage is just having the setup here that lets me simulate certain things in the state. And then the second step will be, instead of hard coding the test, I'm going to want to have a lot of tests and maybe even a way of generating tests so that I can really, because I really want to just get this thing to crash as much as possible if it has bugs, right? And then once I've gotten rid of crash bugs, I also want a way of being able to assert certain things about the state so that I can find bugs that are not crash bugs too. And I want to be able to sort of keep a database that is some data format that I can just say run this test, and that test is run right here, right? And so we're going to build towards that slowly. First I'm going to hard code the simulation just to figure out what the sort of shape of it is. So one thing I obviously need that I'll hack and write real quick is we're going to have various steps, and we'll do different things depending on which step we're on. So like maybe the first few steps I won't do anything, and then maybe I want to like be able to say simulate key, here's the input, let me look at my 4coder default bindings. Remapping commands. Bind. Remapping.h. There we go. Because I want to use this same format that I've got right here so that I know that I'm putting in the right things that basically will match whatever I have bound the thing I'm testing to, right? So I want to, in this case, do a vertical split. Why not? I want to simulate that key press. And then maybe at like 100, simulate this key press. And hey, let's just throw in a little bit more for fun. There. There. and then maybe like a simulate exit. Right? Okay, so let's just get that much figured out, and or I'm gonna have to be able to simulate a lot more. I want to simulate clipboard input. I want to simulate mouse input. I want to simulate well, files I don't actually simulate. So files will really be opened and stuff in the same way they're currently open. That can actually all be tested. It's really mouse, keyboard, clipboard, the escape, like the X button. These are the things I'm going to be simulating. I think that's all of them. So it's really literally just the simulate calls that I've added then that I have to go implement. So I need one of these and I need one of these. Okay. Damn. Changed my position again. I want to go double check that I got those correct. 1 minute. So 4coder bind helper, bind. Modifiers is a U8, and it's key code types. Key code is a U32. Okay. Damn, that sucks. Okay. U8. Okay. 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 There we go. Now, to simulate exit, we just have to say send or trying to kill equals true. And for simulate key, I want to see this. Key input data, where is that? So this right here will force me to not do too many inputs per frame. The way input is basically stored right now is on this fixed thing. Part of the reason for that is that's the way I wrote it originally. It's kind of hard to actually have very many inputs in a frame physically anyway on the keyboard, because like if you press all the keys at once, it still only sends a few of them. So there's not really a point in being able to dynamically expand that, except that in theory it's nicer, like in the sort of theoretical sense. And this is one of those times where in the theoretical sense it actually would be nicer, because then if I wanted a frame where I pushed on 20 key presses in one frame during the simulation, then it works. But then I'd be simulating something that I don't think is actually, necessarily real anyway. So it's only like it's one of those things that's only a win in theory. Hopefully in practice the limit that I've set is not a problem. Now I need to look up key event data. This is where things maybe get a little tricky. Yeah. So part of the problem here is when I say simulate this key press with these modifiers, that's conceptually the thing I want, but it's not the thing the data actually communicates. The data has to communicate also stuff like, was this a character press or not? And so basically I have two choices. I could just make this struct the parameters and simulate by calling, hey, here are the parameters for the struct, go. The advantage to that is that if the core is robust against bad inputs coming in there, then it won't matter as much if I have bugs in one platform layer that aren't in others, right? It'll still be a bug in those platform layers that I'm putting in bad data, but at the very least it won't be critically bad because the core has thought about how it should handle that kind of malformed input. On the other hand, at some point I have to actually think about how do I do this transformation, because I really don't want to be I want to be able to run tests where I'm putting in good data, and I need to be able to specify those tests in this format, which is, this is the data my brain believes in, so I need to be able to specify it this way, and there should be a way to get these back. So I think that the answer for now is actually to do this, to pass these parameters in as parameters fully, so that I can test the malformed cases too, which will be good. Because hey, if I get my stability at the core, then if I end up with 10 different platform layers, they can have a bug, and it won't be critical because the core has thought about how to handle that bug that is going to be inevitable if I do a Raspberry Pi port, or like a terminal version and stuff like this. The more that the core can handle bad input, the better, basically. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab key event data key, equals this one right here, and we'll just fill it out. And those simulates are all going to be incorrect, so maybe I need to write a wrapper already. So the translation's probably not that hard. Do I have a key codes array? Yeah. So I have this method which lets me ask what the name is of a particular key code, and it only is supposed to operate for the ones in the enum. And that means if I don't get a string back, okay. Then we're just simulating code 00 modifiers. Else, now the problem becomes, given the key code I press, is that always the same as the character? I think it is. So then we just need to figure out character no lock. No caps lock. Okay. Now we need to figure out if the modifiers array has modifier indexes, if modifiers modifier caps index we'll do one of these guys. Again, not actually that good of a trick. Pretty bad trick, in fact, because it only handles the, like, really simple case. But, it's unclear how I would even, this is even harder than like the operating system layer. Like on the operating system layer, it's in Linux and Mac especially pretty easy to simulate, hey, what was the result of this if I wasn't holding caps lock, or if caps lock wasn't down, what would have been this character? It actually gives you that information pretty easily. Windows doesn't, and that's why I simulate it here. But it's worse because if I'm going to make this code shareable, I have to have a way to get that answer even without, you know, independent of the operating system, basically. And so maybe I need to like set up a data table that I just have access to that is the conversion from uppercase to lowercase and lowercase to uppercase for all characters that have a pairing like that. and I was just fidgeting with a little staple. I dropped it on the ground, which is not good. I can't see it, but we're ignoring it because it's not staring at the floor does not make for great stream material. Is like, at least that's my intuition. I'm not no expert, but I feel like that's not good stream material, right? Ooh, whoops! I accidentally hit F2 as well. No, come on, just build again. Stop building the site. I didn't want that. Ah, yes, we need to mem copy into the modifiers from these modifiers the size of the key modifiers. And you know, that reminds me of another thing I needed to do. Another version of simulate key. This is where we're getting into sort of multi-axis data type problem. Yeah, just ignore what I just said. It too hard to explain right now. Okay, and Control Alt Command Shift. So I can't simulate caps and hold index via this API anyway. Fine. Fine, this is just a convenience one. If I want to simulate those, I'll have to use the other API. Plus, these APIs will eventually become redundant, and not just redundant, unused, because, like I said, I won't always be driving this from an API anyway. I won't have a series of calls to specify my tests at the end of the day. I'll have a data format, and that'll probably just use one of these calls anyway, probably the most low-level one. So, or at least there's a good chance of that being the way this works out. So it's not that big a deal. This is just for convenience while I set crap up. Control mod array modifier index control index equals 1. Control with alt. Control with alt. Control with command. Control with command. Okay, do. Shift. No, stop. Yes, there we go. Control with shift. Control with shift. And then simulate the key. Input code mod array. You go away. Modifiers. Badoop, badeep, badoopa. Hey, I'm not doing that. That wasn't me. No hands. Look at this. No hands. Woo! Alright. That's kind of cool. Oh man, that's kind of cool. I'll keep playing that whilst I check out the chat. Can I get any woots from the chat? Yeah, I think a part of what helps me to debug is to like confirm like like I'm looking at a bug and I'm kind of in disbelief. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And then all I do is run the debugger and go like, no, yep, it called this function, and like in theory it might have been that the breakpoint got hit. All I did was set a breakpoint and confirm that it did get hit in this case and not in this case. And from there my brain was like, well then this is what the problem is. And so maybe it was actually important information. Maybe my brain was like, well, maybe that thing is getting called and screwed up for some other reason. But as soon as I knew that one critical data point, that bit breakpoint wasn't being reached, I was like, okay, if we're not calling that, why aren't we calling it? And then I remembered the whole call, like, I remembered the whole code path that's supposed to lead to that all at once as soon as I got that data point. So it's not totally true that I didn't use the debugger. It's just like it feels like I should have been able to figure that out without the debugger. And for some reason, I just like required some like really hard evidence that I actually had the bug to get my brain to deal with it. Nick Stop 95 asks, is there a way in 4coder to change indentation level of the switch statement? Not really. You could stop using virtual whitespace, which forces it to one spot, and then just do it yourself. But there's no, and if you do it that way, you could rewrite the code a little bit in the indentation code. If you have the customization layer, you could stop using virtual whitespace and then write a modification to a text indenter that does that for you. But that's you know, and there are some people who've messed with that stuff and had success. So it's not impossible. It's just it's unfortunately not a great setup yet. So now that we have this, right, working, I'm going to take a break, have some lunch, think about the best next place to go with this, and then I will resume streaming at that point. So thanks for everyone who came to say hi during the first leg of this 4coder Friday, and I'll see you later.